No. Don't close the door. What's going on? What's going on? I had some kind of strange, interesting call about somebody having had their throat slit.
Okay.
So what's going on here? On suspicion of murder, you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence.
It's 8 a.m. on the 17th of July 2022. Police arrive at a house in Havant after a 999 call said that someone had been murdered there. The door is answered by a woman in a dressing gown, smoking, and she's just very casually apologising for her dogs that are barking. She doesn't seem panicked or distressed at all. The woman is 27-year-old Shaye Groves, and she shares this house with her flatmate Lauren White. As the police enter this home, there is an overpowering stench of bleach. They also notice as they walk through the living room that there are posters of famous murderers everywhere. Also displayed on the walls are knives, Celtic daggers, and Viking axes. They make their way upstairs, and when they enter the master bedroom, they find the body of Frankie Fitzgerald. My name is Emma, this is Tiki Bar True Crimes, and I'm going to tell you the case of Shaye Groves. After discovering the body of Frankie Fitzgerald, the police begin to question the residents of this house, including Shaye Groves. Shaye Groves was a 27-year-old woman who was in a relationship with Frankie Fitzgerald. Frankie was a father to 2 children from a previous relationship. Shaye Groves is also a mother to a daughter who is very young, around 3 or 4. The father isn't Frankie, this is a daughter from a previous relationship. I don't think her daughter lived with her, I'm not sure, but she definitely wasn't there the morning of the 17th of July. Frankie and Shaye had a rocky relationship. They'd only been dating for 6 months, but they'd broken up and got back together multiple times during that period. There was a lot of fighting. It was quite a passionate relationship. Frankie was known to his family and friends as being a very loving, kind, gentle man. He was a good father and will be missed by many. So the police begin to question Shaye, and she starts to come up with this story of how her and Frankie got into a fight. He tried to strangle her and she murdered him out of self-defense. Frankie had been dead for a few hours by this point, and Shaye's response to that was that she was so emotionally distressed that she kind of forgot to call police. Now, this is the woman who didn't seem very emotionally distressed when the police knocked on the door. She was in her dressing gown, very casual, smoking, apologising about the dogs. Police have their doubts about Shaye's story, not only because when they're looking at the crime scene, it doesn't really match up to what she's saying. The woman that answered the door wasn't emotionally distressed, but also the 999 call that they received, which led them to that house, told a very different story. Before we go into that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Shaye Groves. So Shaye Groves, over the past few years, her appearance and her recreational activities had changed drastically. She'd gone from this kind of girly girl, blonde hair, to a very different look. She had facial piercings, tattoos, she dyed her hair. She'd also started to drink far more and take recreational drugs, including cocaine. She suffered with mental health issues caused by the abuse she experienced as a child. She had depression and PTSD and would regularly self-harm. She carried a combat blade with her at all times, which is illegal here in the UK. Shaye and Frankie met 6 months prior at a bar, and the thing that really kind of bonded them was their mutual interest in BDSM. They regularly filmed themselves having sex, and they would often use things like knife play within their sexual activities. Frankie's interest in pain was specific to the bedroom. Outside, in the outside world, he was known as a very kind, loving and deeply warm man who was a great father. Shaye's interest in pain, however, didn't seem to be that specific to the bedroom. Whenever her and Frankie would break up, which was multiple times throughout their 6 months relationship, she would text her friends saying that she wanted to hurt him, stab him, inflict unnecessary pain onto him. So although this case is classed as a crime of passion, this knowledge makes you question whether it truly was, or whether she had the motivation prior and had pre-planned her attack. Shaye Groves was really into true crime, which I get as a true crime channel, and I assume most of the viewers of this video are also into true crime. But Shay took it to the next level. She idolized murderers. She had their posters on the wall. She had weaponry displayed in her house. She is trying to convince police that this was self-defense. However, what happened that morning and the phone calls that were made tell a very different story. At 5 a.m, Shay texts her friend Vicky to say that Frankie had stormed off. They'd gotten into a fight and he had left the house. At 7:45 a.m, Shay video chats her friend Vicky, and they're just kind of laughing, chatting, having a good time. And then Shay randomly turns around and says, "Oh, I've got something to show you. I've done something." And she very calmly walks up the stairs, enters the bedroom, turns the phone around and shows Vicky Frankie's lifeless, bloody body. Initially, Vicky thinks this is a joke because this is the kind of thing that Shay might joke about. Shay has kind of like a weird sense of humour, and Vicky thinks maybe they've staged some kind of weird prank. But then twice, Shay puts the phone really close to Frankie's neck, and Vicky can clearly see a very large bloody gash. There's also blood everywhere, all around this room. Throughout this time, Shay isn't panicked at all. She's laughing, chatting like it's just a normal day. She goes back downstairs, like potters around, maybe makes a cup of tea, comes back up and shows Vicky the body again. It's very kind of blasé, like nothing's really happened. Vicky, on the other hand, is like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? And Shay picks up on this, and Shay realizes that Vicky is not as kind of carefree about this as Shay is. And so Shay starts to say how this was justified, that what happened was her and Frankie got into an argument. They went to bed, and Shay went through Frankie's phone. She thought he had been having an affair. She found messages from a 13-year-old girl. Thinking that Frankie was a paedophile, she then went on to brutally murder him whilst he slept. And remember, she has like weapons everywhere, and during their sexual activities, they have a lot of knife play. So there was a dagger on the bedside table. She stabs him 17 times in the chest, 3 times in the neck, and twice more on the torso. So while she's telling this story of how it was kind of a crime of passion, like she just saw red, she thought, oh my God, Frankie is a paedophile, and she just lost it, grabbed the nearest thing to her and started stabbing him. Whilst she's telling this story, she's still kind of chatting, and she's cleaning up with bleach, like trying to clean all the blood off. Not in like a desperate, oh my God, look what I've done. She's saying things like, wow, look how far the blood's gone. Vicky asked her, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with Frankie's body? Shay says, I'm going to bury him in the back garden. I'm going to convince everyone that he's just left, that he was depressed and suicidal, and that he took his own life. And if you remember, at 5 a.m, she texted Vicky to say that Frankie had stormed out the home. He obviously hadn't. He was laying deceased on her bed. So she's already creating an electronic alibi for herself. Vicky is still unconvinced. She's like, this is wrong. You're going to get caught. Like, this isn't right. Shay picks up on this and tries to justify her actions further by saying that Frankie was abusive. She started to say that Frankie raped her and went on to show Vicky 3 clips of Frankie raping Shay. I'm just going to say at this point that this is Shay's side of the story. And although she has these clips and she has this supposed 13-year-old girl that Frankie has been messaging, it's not necessarily true. Vicky is unconvinced, and when they end the phone call, she ends up calling 999. So the police receive that 999 call, they turn up at Shay's home, they find Frankie's body, and they immediately arrest both Shay and her housemate Lauren White. Now, on that video chat that Shay had with Vicky that morning, Vicky could hear Lauren in the background saying, "I don't want to do this, why are you making me do this?" So it's thought that Shay forced Lauren to clean up. She convinced Lauren that she was involved as well, as she was in the house at the same time, and started to force Lauren into helping her cover up her murder. Lauren is initially arrested and charged, but these charges were later dropped and she is released. So the attention now goes on to Shaye Groves. Police begin to question her, and the story she tells them is slightly different to the one that she tells Vicky. She said that Frankie came over, they were relaxing, hanging out, taking cocaine, drinking, and they got into an argument. She believed Frankie was having an affair. Frankie falls asleep in the bedroom and Shay begins to go through his phone. She finds these messages to a 13-year-old girl. She then says that she wakes Frankie up to confront him about this. He gets really angry and starts attacking Shay. He tries to choke her and she says that her vision went blurry. She was beginning to lose unconsciousness, so she grabbed the nearest thing. She was hoping to get the music box on the bedside table, but ended up grabbing the dagger. She struck him in the throat with this dagger, and Frankie flew back and hit the back wall. He started sliding down it slowly. Shay says there was blood everywhere. She couldn't stop the bleeding, so she decided that she was just going to murder him and began to stab him multiple times. Panicked, she ended up calling her friend Ashley, who told her to wrap Frankie's body in plastic and start cleaning now with bleach and get your housemate Lauren to help. So this is what she did. The police are not convinced. The forensics don't match up with this story at all, so they arrest and charge Shay for murder. At the trial, Shay pleads not guilty. Shay's defence stated that Frankie was an abusive boyfriend. There were text messages saying that if you ever left me, I will hang you. Friends tried to convince her to leave the relationship. When questioned, why did she say to Vicky that Frankie was asleep when she attacked him, but then told the police that she had woken him up? She said that she didn't want to blacken Frankie's reputation. She didn't want people to know that he was abusive and that he tried to kill her. So this was essentially Shay's defence, that it was an abusive relationship, that she switched stories because she didn't want to blacken Frankie's name. However, the prosecution and close friends told a very different story. Vicky said that the rough sex between Shay and Frankie was always consensual, that the clips she showed of Frankie supposedly raping her had been edited. They'd been taken out of context, and when you watch the full video, you realise that this was consensual sex. Vicky goes on to say that Shay has a reputation for doing this. She would make her boyfriends have sex with her in a rough kind of way that made it look like rape. She would film it, and then if the boyfriends ever tried to break up with her, she threatened to release those tapes. Vicky said that Shay had been doing this ever since she started to take recreational drugs, including cocaine, that Shay's behaviour had become more erratic over time. She was controlling, and she was the one that was actually abusive in those relationships. So Shay used their personal life and their mutual interest and enjoyment in BDSM to essentially blackmail Frankie. The text messages that Shay received saying, "Oh, if you ever leave me, I'm going to hang you," that was just kind of part of their foreplay. They liked that kind of possessive element to a relationship, and Frankie meant no harm in that. Vicky said that Shay wasn't just abusive and aggressive to Frankie, she had begun to become quite aggressive to friends. She once assaulted one of their friends with a nail clipper, cutting her face. When she got into an argument, she could become violent. Whenever her and Frankie would split up, she would text her friends in group chat saying, I'm going to murder him. Let's come up with a plan. She even came up with a plan once to get him down a dark alley and stab him and try and make it look like self-defense. Additionally, the message that she saw to the 13-year-old girl, what had happened was this 13-year-old girl had pretended to be a 17-year-old girl. The minute Frankie realised that she wasn't, Frankie blocked her and didn't message her again. So the idea that Frankie was a paedophile preying on younger women, just not true. And Shay would have seen that when she looked at the messages. Shaye Groves showed absolutely no remorse in murdering her boyfriend Frankie. Not only did she ring Vicky and was just kind of chatting and having a girly chat that morning, she also messaged her other boyfriend. Yeah, she had another boyfriend, and she was giggling and flirting and inviting him over to the house. She did not care that she had murdered this kind, loving man whose children are now going to grow up without a father. The jury took 18 hours to come back with a verdict of guilty. When that verdict was read, Shay just smiled. The prosecution tried to argue that Shay's addiction to true crime and her true obsession meant that she tried to use that information to come up with an alibi, to try to get away with murder. That was the case of Shaye Groves. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next one. This one has taken a little longer. It needed more research because it was a much smaller case. Also, I'm self-employed and January has been really busy for work. So I just didn't have as much time as usual, but I will try and get them out now, hopefully weekly, if not fortnightly from now on. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.